There is an image etched into the soul of a nation, a long table laden with the bounty of a new world, stern men in black hats and buckled shoes, breaking bread with noble savages in feather and leather. It is a moment of impossible harmony, a single perfect scene of peace and gratitude from which a country was born. This is the story of the first Thanksgiving. It is the story we tell our children, the story we tell ourselves. And it is a lie. A beautiful, necessary and powerful lie, crafted not in the 17th century, but in the crucible of a nation tearing itself apart. So if the bedrock myth is a fiction, what is the truth it conceals? What ancient human impulse is so powerful that we would invent a memory for it? We will pull on that one simple thread, the ritual meal of thanks, and follow it back through time and across continents. Our journey will take us from the fragile desert booths of the Jewish Sukkot and the overflowing joy of India's Pongal to a Korean feast for the dead at Chuseok. We will uncover the sacred power of the yam in Nigeria's New Yam Festival and confront the sacrificed god at the heart of the Celtic Lughnasadh. Through them all, we will uncover a hidden code, an unbroken chain of ritual that connects us all, revealing that breaking bread is not just a meal. It is a contract with the forces of life and death. The story we know begins in 1621 in a place called Plymouth, but the act of giving thanks on American soil is a far older and more tangled tale. Long before the Mayflower's shadow fell upon the coast of Massachusetts, other Europeans had already knelt on these shores in gratitude. In 1565, half a century earlier, Spanish colonists in what is now Florida celebrated a massive Thanksgiving and then laid out a meal to which they invited the local Seloy tribe. In 1578, an English explorer named Martin Frobisher held a service of thanks in the icy expanse of Newfoundland. And in Virginia, English settlers at Jamestown gave thanks for their safe arrival in 1607. And again in 1619, a group known as the Berkeley 100 Settlers were bound by their charter to keep the day of their arrival yearly and perpetually holy as a day of thanksgiving to Almighty God. The Pilgrims were not first. They were not even unique. They were simply the ones chosen, 2 centuries later, to be the protagonists of a national epic. To understand what truly happened in 1621, we must first clear the stage of its familiar actors and see the world as it was. The land the English called New Plymouth was to its inhabitants Patuxet, one of 69 autonomous villages in the sophisticated Wampanoag nation. For 10,000 years, they had lived in a sacred, reciprocal relationship with this land. Their lives were governed by a rhythm of gratitude, a continuous cycle of thanks for the bounty of the earth. They had festivals for the strawberry harvest, for the green corn, and for the cranberry, their most important tribal holiday. These were not one-off events, but integral parts of a world view where one could not keep taking from the earth without giving something back. Their mythology was populated by beings like Moshup, a benevolent giant who created their islands, taught them how to fish for whales, and presided over their destinies. Gratitude was not an event. It was the very fabric of existence. But by 1620, that fabric was torn. Years before the Pilgrims arrived, European explorers and slavers had brought something else to these shores: disease. A great plague swept through the coastal tribes, killing as many as 3/4 of the Wampanoag people. The entire village of Patuxet was wiped out, its fields untended, its homes silent, the bones of its dead left unburied. This is the world the Pilgrims found. Not a virgin wilderness, but a graveyard. The 100 or so passengers who arrived on the Mayflower in the winter of 1620 were entrepreneurs and religious refugees, poorly prepared and desperate. They arrived too late to plant, and without enough food. That first winter was a nightmare they called the starving time. Scurvy and disease tore through their ranks. By spring, nearly half of them were dead. They survived in part by robbing Wampanoag graves and stealing stores of corn. Meanwhile, the Wampanoag, under their great sachem, or leader Usamequin, whom the English called Massasoit, faced a crisis of their own. Decimated by the plague, they were now vulnerable to their rivals, the Narragansett tribe, who had been largely spared by the sickness. Usamequin saw in the English newcomers' formidable muskets a potential solution, and so a desperate alliance was forged. It was not born of friendship, but of a mutual strategic need. A Patuxet man named Tisquantum, who had been kidnapped, enslaved in Europe, and learned English before miraculously finding his way home, only to discover his entire village was gone, served as the bridge between these two wounded, wary worlds. He taught the English how to plant the native corn that would save them. The successful harvest of 1621 was cause for celebration, but it was not what we would call a Thanksgiving. The Pilgrims' concept of a Thanksgiving was a solemn religious day of fasting and prayer to God for deliverance from hardship. The 1621 event was something else entirely, a secular English harvest festival known as a harvest home. It was a raucous 3-day affair of feasting, drinking strong barley ale, playing games, and firing off muskets in a show of military strength. We know this from the only 2 primary English accounts of the event, written by Edward Winslow and William Bradford. Winslow's letter is the most detailed. He writes that after the harvest, the governor sent 4 men out hunting for fowl. He then mentions the arrival of Usamequin, with some 90 men, and only about 50 colonists, most of whom were children and teenagers. Of the 20 English women who had made the voyage, only 4 were still alive to prepare this feast. The power dynamic portrayed in our paintings is a complete reversal of the truth. The Wampanoag were not passive, invited guests. Some historians believe their arrival was a calculated political act, a show of force. Others suggest they may have been drawn by the sound of musket fire, arriving to investigate a potential threat. Whatever the cause, they were active participants. Seeing the meagre provisions, they went out and returned with 5 deer, which they gifted to the English leaders. The venison they provided was the centerpiece of the feast. They were not guests at an English meal. They were co-hosts of a diplomatic summit. This fragile peace, this moment of coexistence, would not last. Within a single generation, the alliance would shatter, leading to a brutal war that devastated the Wampanoag and ultimately cost them their land and their political independence. This is the ghost at the feast. This is the history that the comforting myth erases. And it is why, since 1970, many Native Americans and their allies have gathered on that same hill in Plymouth not to celebrate, but to mourn. They call it the National Day of Mourning, a solemn protest to remember the genocide, the stolen land, and the relentless assault on a culture that had its own, far older ways of giving thanks. So how did this complicated, fraught political meeting become the simple, heartwarming holiday we know today? The answer lies not in the 17th century, but in the 19th, and with a single, remarkably persistent woman. Her name was Sarah Josepha Hale. A prominent writer, activist, and the influential editor of the most popular magazine of the era, Godey's Lady's Book, Hale was the author of the nursery rhyme, Mary Had a Little Lamb. But her great passion was the creation of a national Thanksgiving holiday. Growing up in New England, she was familiar with the regional tradition. In her 1827 novel, Northwood, she devoted an entire chapter to describing a Thanksgiving feast, effectively inventing the menu we now consider traditional. The roasted turkey as the lordly head of the table, the savoury stuffing, the chicken pie, and of course the pumpkin pie in its distinguished niche. For 17 years, Hale campaigned tirelessly. She wrote editorials, published recipes, and sent letters to 5 different presidents, arguing that a national day of thanks could be a unifying force for a country being torn apart by sectional tensions. Her early letters failed, but in 1863, at the height of the Civil War, she wrote to President Abraham Lincoln. Just months after the pivotal and bloody Union victory at Gettysburg, Lincoln was receptive. He saw the political wisdom in Hale's vision. On October 3, 1863, Lincoln issued a proclamation written by his Secretary of State William Seward, calling on all Americans to set apart the last Thursday of November as a day of thanksgiving and praise. He urged them to ask God to heal the wounds of the nation. The modern American Thanksgiving was born. It was not a descendant of the 1621 feast, but the deliberate creation of a 19th century media influencer and a president desperate to forge a single, unified national identity from the fires of war. They needed a simple, peaceful origin story. And so, a complicated harvest festival and political summit was remade 2 centuries later into the first Thanksgiving. The story of the American Thanksgiving, then, is a story of a people seeking a home in a new wilderness and creating a ritual to anchor themselves in it. But this is not a new story. It is an echo of a much older one, a tale not of a physical journey across an ocean, but a spiritual journey through a desert. To find its source, we must travel from the forests of New England to the ancient landscapes of the Near East, and to a festival that finds gratitude not in security, but in profound vulnerability. This is the Jewish festival of Sukkot, known as the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Booths. Sukkot is one of the 3 great pilgrimage festivals of ancient Israel, when the people were commanded to travel to the temple in Jerusalem. It begins 5 days after the solemn fast of Yom Kippur. And like the American holiday, it has a dual nature. It is Chag HaYasif, the festival of ingathering, a joyous celebration of the autumn fruit harvest. But it is also Chag HaSukkot, the festival of booths, a historical commemoration of the 40 years the Israelites wandered in the desert after their exodus from slavery in Egypt. The central commandment of the festival is to leave the security of one's home and to dwell in a sukkah. This is a temporary, fragile hut with walls that can be made of any material, but a roof, called schach, that must be made of something that grew from the ground but is no longer attached to it, like loose branches or palm fronds. The covering must be sparse enough to provide shade from the sun, yet allow those inside to see the stars at night. For 7 days, families eat their meals, entertain guests, and sometimes even sleep in these vulnerable structures. It is a ritual of deliberate remembrance, a physical act that forces the participant to connect the abundance of the current harvest with the precarity of their ancestors past. It is a profound theological statement that all security is temporary and all bounty is a gift from a protective divine hand. Within this fragile dwelling, another ritual unfolds, one that binds the natural world to the human community. This is the waving of the Arba Minim, the 4 species. A lulav, which is a bouquet made from a palm frond, 2 willow branches, and 3 myrtle branches, is held in one hand. In the other is the etrog, a fragrant lemon-like citron. The symbolism of these 4 plants is a deep well of poetry and meaning. In one interpretation, they represent the human body, united in the service of God. The tall, straight palm frond is the spine, the oval myrtle leaves are the eyes, the willow leaves are the lips, and the heart-shaped etrog is the heart. Another, more profound interpretation sees the 4 species as a blueprint for the community itself. The etrog, which has both a beautiful fragrance and a good taste, represents the person who possesses both Torah wisdom and good deeds. The palm frond, which comes from the date palm and has taste but no fragrance, represents the person who has wisdom but lacks good deeds. The myrtle, which has a lovely scent but no taste, is the person of action, full of good deeds but lacking in deep study. And finally, the willow, which has neither taste nor smell, represents the person who has neither. During the ritual, all 4 are held together. The blessing cannot be said if one is missing. The message is clear. The community is incomplete without every single member, regardless of their piety or knowledge. They must all be bound together to be whole. This is the very ideal of unity that Lincoln and Hale sought to create with their new American holiday, a spiritual technology for binding difference into a single, sacred whole. Each day of the festival, these 4 species are taken in hand, a blessing is recited, and they are waved in all 6 directions: east, south, west, north, up, and down. This is accompanied by the chanting of the Hallel, psalms of praise. The act acknowledges God's presence everywhere, and it is an exuberant expression of thanks for the harvest. And yet, despite its focus on fragility and remembrance of hardship, Sukkot is known by another name, Zeman Simchateinu, the season of our rejoicing. It is the only festival with an explicit commandment to be joyful. This presents a beautiful paradox. True gratitude, the deepest joy, is found not in the illusion of permanent security, but in the conscious, disciplined memory of hardship and deliverance. It is the joy of the survivor, a gratitude sharpened by the knowledge that everything can be lost, and therefore everything that is had is an immeasurable gift. From the deserts of memory, our journey now takes us to the lush, sun-drenched landscapes of southern India, to a festival that expresses gratitude not with solemn reflection, but with an explosion of vibrant, life-affirming joy. Here, in the Tamil lands, we find Pongal, a thanksgiving that extends to the entire ecosystem, where the central ritual is a visceral, dramatic performance of abundance itself. Pongal is an ancient harvest festival, with roots stretching back over 2,000 years to the Sangam age of the Dravidian peoples. It is a 4-day celebration that marks the end of the winter solstice and the beginning of the sun's northward journey. It is a time to give thanks, not just to a single deity, but to the entire web of life that makes the harvest possible. To Surya, the sun god, to the cattle who are partners in labour, to the rains and the earth, and to the community that shares in the work and the bounty. The festival unfolds over 4 distinct days, each with its own purpose. It begins with Bogi Pongal, a day of purification and renewal. Families clean their homes, discard old and unwanted items, and burn them in great bonfires. It is a symbolic act of casting off the old, the negative, the worn out, to make way for the new. The air fills with smoke and the promise of a fresh start. The second day, Surya Pongal, is the main event, the day dedicated to the sun. On this day, the festival's namesake dish is prepared. In courtyards and open spaces, often facing the rising sun, families gather around a new clay pot, decorated with garlands and turmeric. Into this pot go freshly harvested rice, milk and jaggery, or raw cane sugar. The mixture is cooked over an open fire, the climax of the entire festival. The moment of highest anticipation is when the sweet, milky rice begins to boil and bubble up, overflowing the sides of the pot. The word Pongal itself means to boil over. At this instant, a great shout goes up from the family. Pongalo, Pongal! It is a cry of pure joy, a prayer for prosperity, and a symbol of abundance made manifest. The overflowing pot is not a mess. It is a blessing, a sign that the coming year will be one of overflowing good fortune. The third day is Matu Pongal, a beautiful and moving tribute to the cattle. In an agricultural society, cattle are not just animals. They are partners, sources of wealth, labour and sustenance. On this day, they are honoured. The cows and bulls are bathed. Their horns are polished and painted in bright colours, and they are adorned with bells and garlands of flowers. They are fed special treats and led in processions. It is a day of profound gratitude for the silent, steadfast creatures who help bring the harvest from the earth. Finally, the fourth day, Kanam Pongal, is a day for community. Families gather, visit relatives, share meals, and strengthen the bonds of kinship. Women will often offer prayers for the well-being of their brothers. It is a day that recognizes that the harvest's true purpose is to sustain the human family. The entire festival is a feast for the senses. Homes are decorated with intricate kolam, beautiful geometric patterns drawn on the ground with rice flour. Doorways are hung with strings of mango leaves, and stalks of sugarcane are propped up, all symbols of auspiciousness and happiness. This is a Thanksgiving that is holistic and ecological. It understands that gratitude is not a single transaction between a human and a god. It is a complex web of relationships. Thanks must be given to the celestial powers of the sun and rain, to the terrestrial partners in the earth and the cattle, and to the social fabric of family and community. All must be honoured for the harvest to be possible. And at its heart is that overflowing pot. Unlike the solemnity of a Puritan prayer or the quiet reflection of a sukkah, Pongal teaches that joy itself is a sacred duty. The ritual is not complete until the abundance is performed, shouted aloud, and witnessed by all. The overflowing of the pot is the prayer. The exuberant celebration is the offering. It is a powerful testament to the idea that the most profound form of gratitude is an uncontained, overflowing and shared joy. Our search for the heart of Thanksgiving has taken us from the forests of a new world to the deserts of ancient memory, and to the sun-drenched fields of India. Now, our journey turns inward and into the night. We travel to Korea, to a festival that expands the Thanksgiving table beyond the living and builds a bridge to the realm of the unseen. Here, under the light of the full harvest moon, we find Chuseok, a festival where gratitude is a sacred contract between the generations, a feast shared with ghosts. Chuseok, which literally means autumn eve, is one of the most important holidays in the Korean calendar. It is celebrated on the 15th day of the 8th lunar month, when the moon is at its brightest and most full. Its origins are ancient, tracing back to the Silla kingdom 2,000 years ago, and likely born from even older shamanistic rituals honouring the harvest moon. Today, it is a time of mass pilgrimage, as millions of Koreans travel back to their ancestral hometowns to honour the ones who came before them. The centrepiece of the holiday is not a meal for the living, but a meal for the dead. On the morning of Chuseok, families perform a memorial service called chari. An elaborate table is set with offerings of food and drink, all made from the first and best of the autumn harvest: freshly harvested rice, gleaming fruits, and an array of meticulously prepared dishes. This is not a symbolic gesture. It is a meal prepared for the spirits of the ancestors. An offering of gratitude rooted in the Confucian belief that those who have passed on continue to watch over their descendants, protecting them and bestowing good fortune. After the ceremony at home, the family travels to the tombs of their ancestors for a ritual called seongmyo. Here, they perform byolcho, the physical act of caring for those who came before. They carefully trim the grass around the burial mounds, pull weeds, and clean the area. It is a tender act of housekeeping for the dead. More offerings of food and drink are laid out, and the family bows deeply, showing their respect. In this tradition, gratitude is not just a feeling or a prayer. It is an active, physical responsibility. It is a generational contract. The living offer thanks and care to the dead for the gift of life and for their continued spiritual protection. In return, the ancestors, their spirits appeased, bestow blessings upon the living, ensuring a good harvest and a prosperous year. The bounty of the earth is not just a gift from nature. It is a blessing secured by maintaining this sacred, unbroken bond with the past. The most iconic food of Chuseok is a small rice cake called songpyeon. These are made from the flour of the newly harvested rice, and their shape is deeply symbolic. They are formed into a perfect half moon. But then, they are filled with sweet bounty, sesame seeds, red beans, chestnuts, or honey. The act of filling the half-moon shape represents the hope and belief in a future that is waxing, growing towards fullness and prosperity, just like the harvest moon that shines over the festival. The songpyeon are then steamed over a bed of fresh pine needles, which imparts a subtle, clean fragrance, the very scent of the mountains where the ancestors rest. The act of making them is a cherished tradition, a time when families gather, their hands working together to shape these edible prayers, these edible promises of a bright future. In the rituals of Chuseok, food becomes something more than sustenance. It becomes a medium of communication, a bridge between the worlds. The chari table is a shared table, a place where the veil between the living and the dead grows thin. The meal is not simply offered to the spirits, it is shared with them. This elevates the ritual feast from a simple act of thanksgiving to a profound act of communion with the unseen. The kitchen, where the food is prepared, and the gravesite where it is offered, become portals. They are sacred spaces where the family, living and dead, is made whole again, gathered together at one great table under the light of the harvest moon. Our journey into the unseen has shown us a Thanksgiving feast shared with ghosts, a sacred contract with the generations. Now, our path leads us from the moonlit graveyards of Korea to West Africa, to the Igbo people of Nigeria, where the pact with the spirit world is made with the food itself. Here, gratitude is paid to a crop so vital, so central to identity, that it is considered a king, a deity, and the ultimate measure of a man. This is the New Yam Festival, and its rituals reveal a world where food is power, and the harvest is a sacred pact with a sacrificed spirit. Historically, in Igbo land, the yam is not merely a staple food, it is the king of crops. Its cultivation is a brutal year-long battle against the elements, a testament to human strength and perseverance. Unlike lesser crops, yams demand immense labour, creating huge mounds of earth, patiently staking the climbing vines and battling pests with constant vigilance. This is a man's crop, and the size and state of his yam barn, his obi, is the ultimate public ledger of his wealth, his diligence, and his very masculinity. These barns are not simple storehouses. They are cathedrals of wealth, where the largest yams are tied to rafters like sacred relics, displayed for all to see. To be a dike, a man of title and respect, you must first be a DG, a master of yams. This reverence is so profound that a powerful taboo, a spiritual lock, governs its consumption. No one may eat of the new harvest until the gods and ancestors have had their share. The festival that turns this lock is known as Iri Ji, which translates literally to New Yam Eating. Held at the end of the rainy season, typically in August, it is a thanksgiving ceremony to the earth goddess, Ani, who holds the secrets of fertility, and to the specific spirit of the yam itself, a deity named Ahia-Joku, or sometimes Ifejioku. In the spiritual cartography of the Igbo, the high priest of this deity, the Eze Nri, was once the ultimate authority. He was the keeper of the calendar, and from his holy city of Nri, he alone could sanction the harvest, initiating a wave of celebrations across the land. But the power he guarded was born from a terrible secret. An ancient story tells of a time of great famine, when a primordial king, desperate to save his people, was instructed to sacrifice his own daughter, also named Ahia-Joku. Where her dismembered body was buried, the first yams grew. A divine gift, yes, but a constant visceral reminder that abundance is paid for in blood. The yam is not just a crop, it is the flesh of a martyred princess. The rituals of the festival honour this profound debt. On the eve of Iriji, a great purification occurs. All old yams from the previous dying year must be discarded or consumed. All cooking pots, mortars and pestles are scrubbed clean, scouring away the traces of the past to make way for the new life of the harvest. The festival itself begins when the king, or the eldest man of the community, performs the central rite, acting as the bridge between the living and the spirits. Dressed in his finest, he first offers prayers over a kola nut, the breaking of which symbolises peace and covenant. He then takes the first new yam, the most promising of the crop, and thanks the gods and ancestors for their protection from starvation. He offers portions of the roasted yam and a sacrificed chicken to the deities, settling the community's spiritual account. Only after this cosmic transaction is complete can the community partake. The first bite is taken by the priest or king, an act that dissolves the taboo. Then the celebration explodes. Roasted yam is served with rich red palm oil, and great quantities of pounded yam fufu and savoury vegetable soup are shared among all. But this is more than a communal meal. It is a communion with the beyond. The streets erupt with the sound of drums and the arresting sight of the mamanwu, the masquerades. These are not simply dancers in costume, veiled in elaborate wooden masks and cloaked in cascades of raffia. They are the ancestors and nature spirits themselves, made manifest. They emerge from the forest, from the very earth, to dance among the living. Their presence a powerful affirmation that the spirit world accepts the offering and blesses the feast. They are the spectral guests of honour, the living proof of the renewed pact. The New Yam Festival is a contract, signed and sealed in ritual and celebration. It is an acknowledgement that life is a precarious gift from the earth, the ancestors, and the gods. And the feast is the signature, the moment the community consumes its prosperity, its identity, and the very spirit of the King of Crops. We have seen how the yam, the King of Crops, is born from the sacrifice of a martyred spirit, its consumption a renewal of a sacred pact. This shocking idea that the harvest is a gift paid for in blood is not unique. For our final journey, we must travel from West Africa deep into the past, returning to the roots of the European traditions the Pilgrims carried with them. In the misty landscapes of the ancient Celts, we uncover the oldest and most primal layer of the ritual meal. This is the festival of Lughnasadh, and it reveals the darkest truth hidden in the heart of the grain itself, that all abundance is born from sacrifice. For the people to have bread, the god of the harvest must die. Lughnasadh is the great Gaelic festival held on the 1st of August, marking the beginning of the grain harvest. It sits on the wheel of the year, halfway between the summer solstice and the autumn equinox. The festival is named for a god, Lugh, one of the great deities of the Irish pantheon. He was known as Lughnasadh, of the long arm for his skill with a spear, and as the Samildanach, the one skilled in all arts. He was a warrior, a king, a craftsman, and a radiant sun god. But the mythology of his festival is steeped in sorrow and sacrifice. In one of the most ancient tales, Lugh establishes Lughnasadh as a funeral feast and athletic games to commemorate his foster mother, Tailtiu. She was an earth goddess who died from sheer exhaustion after clearing the plains of Ireland to make them ready for agriculture. Her sacrifice, her death, makes the life-giving harvest possible. The festival, from its very inception, links gratitude for the harvest with the memory of a death. A deeper, more primal layer of folklore tells of a struggle for the harvest between two gods. Lugh, the bright hero, must battle a darker figure, sometimes called Crom Dubh, who jealously guards the grain as his treasure. Lugh must defeat this god and seize the grain for humankind. This is the myth of the grain spirit, who must be ritually killed for the harvest to be released. This powerful pagan tradition did not disappear with the coming of Christianity. It was absorbed, transformed, and given a new name, Lammas, from the Old English hlaf mesa, or loaf mass. On this day, the first loaf of bread, baked from the first of the newly harvested and threshed grain, was brought to the church to be blessed. This act of blessing the first fruits is a direct echo of the ancient offering, a Christian prayer laid over a pagan rite. The rituals of Lughnasadh and Lammas all revolve around this central drama of sacrifice and renewal. The cutting of the first sheaf of grain was a solemn moment, the symbolic death of the corn king. Conversely, the very last sheaf to be harvested was often treated with special reverence. It was woven into the shape of a woman, a corn dolly representing the spirit of the grain itself. This dolly was kept safe in the home through the long winter months, a vessel holding the life force of the harvest to be symbolically replanted in the spring by mixing its grains with the new seed, thus ensuring the continuation of the cycle. At the heart of it all is the first loaf. The baking and sharing of this bread is the culmination of the entire drama. It is the act that transforms the sacrificed grain, the body of the dead god, into life-sustaining food for the community. This connects to a concept found across cultures, the sacred offering of the first fruits. In ancient Greece, Rome, and Israel, the very first and best of the harvest was given to the priests as an offering to the gods. The Hebrew word for this offering, bikurim, literally means promise to come. It is an act of profound faith and a sacred bargain. By willingly sacrificing the most precious part of the harvest, before the full abundance is even known or secured, the community demonstrates its trust and enters into a contract with the divine, ensuring that the rest of the harvest will be blessed. This reveals the deepest, most elemental truth hidden beneath our modern Thanksgiving tables. Gratitude, at its core, is not for a free gift. It is for a bounty that comes at a cost. Life requires death. For the community to live, the grain must be cut down. For the future to be secured, the first and best must be given away. The ritual meal, the breaking of that first loaf, is therefore the most sacred moment. It is an act of consuming the sacrificed God, internalizing its life force, and acknowledging the violent, beautiful, and inescapable cycle of existence. Our own Thanksgiving, with its focus on the first great meal after the harvest is gathered, is a secular ghost of this potent, ancient rite. We perform the ritual, but we have forgotten the primal bargain it once represented. We began our journey with a single, comfortable image, the American Thanksgiving. We discovered it was a lie, a 19th century invention designed to soothe a wounded nation. But pulling on that thread led us on a global pilgrimage. In the haunting story of the Wampanoag, we found that the first feast was not one of friendship, but a desperate political treaty. In the fragile desert huts of Sukkot, we looked for security and instead found a gratitude rooted in the memory of deliverance. In the vibrant joy of Pongal, we sought a simple prayer of thanks and found a celebration of the entire ecological web of life. In the moonlit graveyards of Chuseok, we looked for community and found a bridge to the ancestors, a feast shared with the dead. In the vibrant villages of the Igbo, we found a crop that was also a king, a symbol of power and identity, whose harvest was a sacred pact with a sacrificed spirit. In the ancient fields of Lughnasadh, we looked for the harvest's beginning and found its terrible, necessary price: sacrifice. Each festival revealed a new layer of meaning, a new dimension to the simple act of breaking bread in gratitude. And now, at the end of our journey, we can see that these are not separate stories. They are chapters in a single universal human story. The ritual meal of thanks is one of humanity's oldest and most powerful technologies. It is not a passive expression of feeling. It is an active, periodic renewal of a series of sacred contracts that make life possible. It is a political contract, an agreement of mutual survival between peoples. It is a covenantal contract, a pact with the divine to remember hardship and deliverance. It is an ecological contract, an honouring of our dependence on the sun, the soil, the water, and the creatures who share our world. It is a generational contract, a bond of care and remembrance that ties us to those who came before and those who will come after. And at its deepest, most primal root, it is a sacrificial contract with the great turning wheel of life and death itself. When we sit down to our own holiday tables, surrounded by family and food, we think we are simply eating a meal. We believe we are participating in a tradition that is 400 years old, but the truth is far grander and more mysterious. We are unconsciously taking our place in an unbroken chain of ritual that stretches back to the first farmers who looked at their fields and understood that life is a bargain. Breaking bread is how we remember. It is how we give thanks. And it is how we honour our side of the deal, to ensure that the harvest will come again.